forward this. And so welcome, everybody. I'm very excited to have this conversation. We decided, Dana and I, as we were reflecting on the time that we had with you, Ron, both in Napa and Los Angeles, there was a lot of information that was shared. We thought this would be good to revisit it and talk through some of the issues. And so I think, Julie's joining us and she hasn't been in some of those. So it might be a good time to just, do a refresher. Since we will be recording it, I think, I think it would also be good. Oh, there's Diego. It would be good really to talk about what you're doing with other sites as well.
Okay.
I think that, so sometimes for folks to hear what you're doing and what's possible with them might be good as well, right? So let's see. So I think, we're going to have you just kind of do like a brief overview of ABCD. We wanted to do like a check-in on any reflections around the in-person and or how might this approach impact your work. And then we wanted to hear from you, right? Again, like I was just saying, what you might be doing. It sounds like with Sacramento, what you did with Napa, what are some of the, I think there also was these questions around governance that came up around this notion of resident engagement and governance. So that's kind of what we're thinking for today. Dana, did I miss anything?
No, I think also just, it's such a small call. So, Diego and Julie, if you have any specific needs at any point or something you're thinking about, where this might be applied, we could also just take a deep dive into that conversation.
Yeah, be flexible. Great. Welcome, Diego.
Hello, thank you.
How are you?
I'm doing good. We've had some busy couple of weeks here in Imperial County. But I'm excited to be in the call. Thank you for having this. Just as a side note, I know that we had a session on asset-based community development a while back, and we did a icebreaker using the head, hands, and heart.
Oh, nice.
And I've been using it quite a bit in new settings when we're talking about new work groups and trying to engage people in a different topic. And I always end up opening it up to people to say if you're interested in using this tool for yourself or why I chose this tool to get us in a positive framework instead of focusing on the issues of, per se, asthma, focusing only on what needs to be fixed, but what is it that we as a group can bring to the table. So thank you all for that tool.
That's awesome. That's great.
Very cool.
Great. Okay.
Do you want me to do a little overview?
Yeah, just a brief. I think it sounds like Diego participated, Julie less so, but just kind of a refresher. And
Diego, were you at the in-person in LA? Or were you on the?
I don't believe I was.
You were on the. Were you on the earlier webinar we did?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
It was I think a month or two ago.
A couple months ago, yeah. We did the
Okay.
hand, head, heart at the beginning of that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the brief overview is that ABCD is an approach to community building, and that is based on using what a community has and its strengths to help that community create what it wants in terms of its own future. It's an approach in that sense that's about starting with what's working and then building on that, or starting with what's there, might not be activated yet, but starting with what's there and building on that. In doing that, it does a couple of things. It avoids communities feeling overwhelmed by needs assessments or spending lots of time on things that you don't have, which then you can't do anything with because you don't have them. It also helps reinforce some sort of fundamental tenets of equity work because it respects and honors the community for what it has, and builds their power from where they are. The idea is still to build their power and strengthen and grow it bigger than it is at the moment, but starting with what they have. And so then it's also a number of tools that do that, from individual asset inventories, simple ones like the hands, head, heart, to more complex ones, resident capacity inventories, where basically residents' capacities are all sort of surveyed, and then some organizing is done around that. To asset mapping, pretty fundamental tool for ABCD, where communities look for the assets and strengths of their community in 6 areas: individuals, especially connector leaders, associations, which are voluntary groups, institutions, which are agencies, government, nonprofit, corporations, physical, which is places and spaces, exchange, which is areas where people already exchange their gifts, sometimes economically, like small businesses, locally owned businesses, but also farmers markets and time banks and little libraries, any place things are exchanged. And those are really powerful because that's where people already are sharing their gifts. And then culture and stories, recognizing that a lot of a community's gifts and assets can be found by looking at the cultures in the community and the stories of the community. So asset mapping looks at those areas and says, what do we have? The more people in the room when you do it, the more assets you can identify, and the more clear it becomes what you have to work with to take on whatever it is you're taking on. There's other tools that are more engagement focused, like that might be used to get people to an initial asset mapping meeting. House meeting, traditional organizing tools. House meetings, pretty commonly done in asset-based community development. Associational interviews, where you go around to different groups who relate to each other around a common interest voluntarily, and get to know them, and then ask them, share what you're doing, and then see if there's some common ground. Because the advantage of associations is they can work outside of their focus. So even if they're a motorcycle club, they can do other things. There's nothing restricting them to that. And then learning conversations, which is one-on-one conversations done in a systematic way, usually as part of a listening campaign with a team of people, to really try to hear where the community's at, but listen especially for individuals' passions, their hopes, concerns, and their gifts. And the reason we listen for those 3 things is that that's generally what people will act on. If they have a strong desire to see something happen, if they have a strong desire to stop something, and if they're being invited to use their gifts, which the last one actually turns out to be a huge motivator for people to get engaged, because they're actually asking to, being invited to engage around who they are and what they have to offer, and not just that we need another butt in a seat. So those tools are the primary tools of ABCD. And some of the pitfalls are, some folks will get together, they'll get a bunch of agency people in a room and do an asset map, and then use it kind of like a needs assessment or a resource directory, and the residents of the community were never involved, and it kind of goes on a shelf, and then everybody goes back to focusing on needs. The other pitfall is just doing it and sort of going, wow, that's really cool, we're awesome, which is great, but then not doing anything with it. Because the asset map is really a step towards relationship building. So it helps you see where are the gifts and assets in our community, and who do we need to strengthen our relationships with to get done what we want to get done in our community. And sometimes folks don't take that next step, which is to go out and connect with the assets, or to connect the assets with each other. So in a peer community organizing format, that's kind of what you do, and you bring people together and say, given what we have, what do we want to work on? And we follow people's passions and we work on where they're willing to do work. But most folks, and certainly in this universe, come to it with something they need or want to get done. In your case, health outcomes, or reducing asthma, or heart health, and any number of things. And so you do it, and then you do the assets. You look community-wide at the assets, and then after you looked at all the assets, you ask yourself, how can we use these assets that we have to reduce asthma in children, or to strengthen the overall cardio health of Latino men? So whatever the focus may be. And often, and it's already happening in Napa, I think, they have a big wide category of social isolation that they're trying to reduce. And it does tend to spin off, because you do find out where people are really interested in going, and you follow that energy, trusting that you'll be able to, once you get some momentum, steer it into your issue. So I think right now, out of their learning conversations, immediately came a desire across several communities to affirm LGBT people in Napa County by trying to get all the government offices to fly a rainbow flag during Pride Month. Definitely related to social isolation, not necessarily a direct hit on what was in their strategy, but they are finding, from what I hear from Aaron, a lot of energy around that, and so they're going to get going on it. And I think that will produce other things in addition to that.
That's really, really helpful, because just listening to you, like, I just thinking about when you do the act, right, of this asset mapping, and you find out all of that stuff, just the idea, right, of taking that energy, right, like, here's a group that's really interested in like art, like I'm totally interested in street art, and nobody has kind of like, like we found quite a bit of resources and places. And so I don't know if this will make sense, just listening to you about how you can use that process, right, to unearth these things and then support, whatever it is that's come out of it, but that might be in other engagement ways, right? I don't know if that's the way to say it, but anyway, that's helpful to hear what you're saying. Yeah,
the idea is to stay open to where the energy goes. Even if it's not a direct correlation, it gives you a chance to connect assets, create some new energy, and then invite folks to move some of that energy into what you're working on. It usually works that way. We've had a couple of new people join us. Can we introduce them?
Yeah. Well, I think this is Dana. Is that you, or? Oh, it's somebody else. Oh, maybe it's Kim.
Hi, Kim.
Hi, Kim. Hi. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Did you call in?
I did.
Okay, so she's on there twice. So Kim, over here is Ron Dwyer Voss, and
hi, Ron.
Hi. He has done the web discussion, and then we did an in-person. We did one in Napa and one in LA. So he was just providing an overview of the asset-based community development. So, and I don't know that you were able to participate in the web discussion.
Right.
Yeah, so. Great, but thanks for joining.
I felt so lucky because I had something open up and I was like, I'm jumping on. I might be late, but I'm jumping on.
That's right, that's okay.
Thank you.
Kim, I just put a link to the document for the community of practice, and I've taken notes. And so if you actually open that and click on my picture, it'll take you to my cursor, which has the notes from the overview. Might be helpful.
Hey, how fancy.
Oh, technology.
That's right, that's Dana. She's fancy.
So yeah, that's a short overview, the kind of key points. I don't know if Dana, we want to do your questions on the third bullet to see.
Sure. So we do have a check-in question. And, you know, so Ron just gave an overview on asset-based community development and using what a community has and really focusing in on the strengths and building power from where the community is instead of talking about, you know, what is it we need that we don't have. So it's really a mindset shift and looking at just different tools from ABCD and, you know, ways that people can have pitfalls. I'm just trying to give a little recap for you, Kim. And then it's really a tool for helping to build relationships. And also when you think about just the different assets within a community, moving from a siloed asset gift realm into a more interconnected way of working together and leveraging each other's assets in order to do good work together. So the check-in question is, because everyone on the call did not attend the in-person, it's really to think about how might using an asset-based approach, and I would just say / mindset, impact your work. Like if you were able to think about how you could, you know, leverage the gifts, the assets of the community that you're working in, you know, how might that impact your work? And so for the check-in, it's really just, you know, maybe contemplating that question for a moment. And if you come up with some ideas, just offering those to the group and just taking a moment to sort of anchor it.
Or have people use some of these tools or approaches to your work so far.
Yeah, and if you've used some of these tools, just like Ron said, how might you be using them?
Is it just me?
So we have Diego, Julie, Kim, Sue, and Ron, and myself.
Okay.
So I'm going to give you all some time to, while you guys are thinking of that check-in, I have some initial thoughts that I can provide. Like I mentioned when I checked in or introduced myself, the tool, I know it's a little bit more broadened, but the tool of the head, hand, and heart, to me, I really have taken to heart here in our community, just because when we talked with coalition, with new work groups, a lot of our members, we wear different hats, and our day-to-day is always focused on the issues and the barriers than actually focusing on what we have available. It's something that we've also discussed through our Asthma Community Linkages project, which is one of our biggest components in terms of our portfolio strategies for CACHI. And we really do talk about, when we talk about systems changes, not only about new and innovative ways to make change, but also what is it that's already available, what's working, and is there a way to enhance it? How do we enhance communication between community providers and clinic providers? There's been this, there's usually a contention between those two fields, and really they work hand in hand, and if we can improve that communication in those systems and really focus on those assets, we can really improve our health here in Imperial County, at least in terms of asthma, in the example that I'm giving. So currently we have a community-based organization that has never worked with a hospital so directly in terms of providing asthma services for in-home services for asthma. And I really do attribute a lot of that to our framework or mindset about asset-based community development. We haven't, and it's nice to know that there's tools and there's a name for this type of mindset. We didn't really initially think of it that way. We just knew that we needed to change the way that we did things here in Imperial County. Those are my initial thoughts. So I'll share the floor for anyone else that's already started thinking of it.
Thanks, Diego.
Let's see, Julie is, she said, because of other people talking in my office, I don't want to unmute. Tell them to be quiet. I have been taking this approach, but what I'm looking forward to is using these new tools to help my partners, collaborators, and community members. Why starting there is important. They get frustrated and don't want to think about assets in this way because they think they aren't doing anything. Fascinating. They are focused on the problem, and it's been difficult to help switch mindset.
Well, I'm just, for me, just briefly, because I don't have a huge amount to say, but I think, we're all very busy as doers, and, so we're fixing, I'm a fixer, let me connect you, let me get your stuff, whatever. So I think it is totally a mind shift to look and appreciate all that is going on. But I think, for Lake County, if I look at it as on the collaborative level, we have such a gift of everybody at the table that would be an asset to grow from. And then even as at a site level, if I take it back to my site, we have people coming in because they don't feel good. So, you're fixing again. So we do have to look at what it is that we do have and leveraging the assets. So this is interesting. I'm having to kind of get a hold of this one.
And I think, Kim, just to, on the Catchy website that we have, the information that Ron had from the power, like the tools, I think are on there. So I can send that to you afterwards just to make sure you have it. So.
Okay, nice. And just so you know, we're having a thunder and lightning storm here. So if I leave abruptly, you have not said anything to offend me.
Thanks, Kim.
Yeah.
I just want to name too, this mindset shift around how we look at the community and how we gather information. It's like just having that mindset shift, I think, is already just a systems change. Just having that mindset. So I think I just want to add that to the conversation. Just that.
I agree, Dana. I was thinking of other examples that I can provide that might be even a more clear example of asset-based community development. I'm not sure how many in the call know this, but Imperial County has a local health authority commission and has a wellness fund that they are really focused on trying to improve health in Imperial County. But like everything, it's limited resources. It sounds like we have a lot of money, but money doesn't make sustainable change necessarily. It doesn't equate to that. And in terms of its mindset and investment strategy, it really does think of what kind of assets are available in Imperial County before assuming that the money will be enough to solve the issue. So for example, when there's proposals or issues that arise in the commission, they discuss like, how is it that organizations that are here in this table, how can they be stewards of those changes? And can they be stewards of those changes? If they can do it themselves, how can they partner? How can we partner with outside agencies? They also have committees that are dedicated to certain aspects of the healthcare system, like our provider committee that really didn't get any funding for this, but worked on improving asthma outcomes here by making sure that nebulizers were more easily accessible for our community, because that is something that's given to our patients more often. And we don't have enough providers that can distribute DMEs. And so they worked on how do we get our local pharmacies to be able to provide that service and not make it harder for the patient to receive the care that they need.
And what did you come up with?
Oh, for that example, we worked with our health plan to allow for that device to be reimbursed at local pharmacies that qualified for that use. So more pharmacies around Imperial County were able to provide that. So instead of having the patient go to 2 different providers to get the full medication, they can get the medication and the device at the one place.
Nice. That's great.
Part of the, ABCD runs into this fixing issue a lot because part of what happens when you reveal all the assets is you find out that there's a lot of things in the community that could be doing the work. And sometimes folks who are traditionally have been in service-based work sometimes they're even threatened by that like now somebody else is going to do it, or if the residents can do it, why do they need me? And so it is, there's a sort of a principle of ABCD that well, there's a couple. One of them is not about me without me, taken from the disabilities movement, that you don't do stuff about people without them being involved in the decisions, which also means it goes slower. And that professionals have more an accompaniment role than a fixer role. The other principle is that those closest to the issue probably have lots to offer to the issue, and that they might have the best solutions to problems, which means that professionals often then in ABCD are more in a listening mode and figuring out how they can support or what we call lead by stepping back, to create space for folks in the community to implement solutions themselves with the support and help of the local agency, but not with the agency recruiting them to implement the agency solutions. So it's very much a different mindset. It's very difficult. It's difficult to do that and see yourself as a fixer at the same time. It's more about supporting the community in doing its own fixing and bringing sort of your professional skills and knowledge to coach and cheer and provide financial resources like Diego talked about, or other things that help the community fix it itself, which then often leads to a more sustainable set of solutions because they're rooted in the community's passions and gifts and existing assets, and not in whether or not we get a grant renewed or not.
It also strikes me, right, in this brokerage role, if that's the right, like if you know, right, around capacities or assets, resources, right, that are emerging, and then just in your role, right, you know of these gaps, right, like how folks can broker that, or how communities have actually done that, right? Because it's one thing to kind of unearth that, but then like it needs spaces to go to do good things, right?
Communities generally know where their gaps are.
Yeah.
It's usually a matter of bringing resources together. Convening is a huge role that institutions and agencies can play. Both convening people to do the identification process, but then convening resources together to say, hey, these 5 assets look like they have a lot of common energy and or common direction, and we want to introduce you to each other to see how you might all be stronger by working together. And then some of it is shining a light on existing things. So if you're in that sort of center view of a broker, you might see things that others don't. And so then you can shine a light on it or introduce them, or do what a lot of ABCD practitioners call making visible the invisible. The things in the community that are strong and gifts that might only be visible to those on their block or in their immediate circle. So in Napa, in asset mapping, we learned about a group of older women called abuelitos, grandmothers, and they meet weekly somewhere, and they're considered sort of wisdom holders in the community. And there was a lot of folks working on health issues that weren't aware of that group and hadn't met with that group. it's pretty clear that group might be able to provide quite a lot of guidance and connections into the Latino community and Spanish-speaking community. So that's the kind of thing is one group knew of them, or a couple groups knew of them, and sort of lifted them up and made them visible. And now I think there's lots of conversations about how to connect with that group and their circles.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, they sound fun and amazing.
Well, do you want to like talk about what you're doing? I mean, for those of you that are on the phone, you all participated in the art of hosting, and part of this opportunity, right, is we're in this community of practice world, and Ron is one of the folks who's been available to communities to provide technical assistance. And I think some of the communities have kind of struggled with, well, how would I use any of these TEA providers? And so, you know, I thought it would just be helpful for folks to hear, here's a couple of ways in Napa. He's talked about that a little bit. And also he's going to be doing some work in Sacramento. Like this is an example, if you're, you know, thinking, right, you know, those of you that are on the phone, how you might be able to work with him to help something in your community, right? So, because I know you're all working on stuff. So anyway, I just thought it would be interesting. So Ron, Napa, Sacramento.
So Napa's approach was their backbone group is a couple of folks in their public health agency who are working with, you know, groups, the coalition of groups, just like the rest of you are. And they really wanted to take an asset approach, and they sort of naturally do as staff, but they felt like they couldn't until the whole coalition was ready to go that way. So they wanted to do the shift overall, and they felt like it wouldn't be that valuable for them or them and some residents to go out and do some asset mapping if the coalition tried to get what that was for. So sort of back to Kim's comment about if the doers don't understand it, then it's not going to catch on. So I came there and we did an asset mapping exercise together over about an hour. So this was mostly just agency folks, a couple of community leaders, but we looked at those 6 categories, and people identified the assets in and around Napa that aligned with those categories, and then we talked about where there are opportunities based on these assets to connect them, to create progress on their goal of reducing social isolation. And so, and then how those assets could both inform their strategy to do that, as well as help them implement their strategy to do that. So they also decided to follow up on the asset. They have identified some key assets that they think are really important and started that they didn't feel super connected to. So they're doing a lot of learning conversations and kind of a listening campaign to connect with a lot of those and then revisit what they might do together. But as I mentioned earlier, some things are already emerging from those learning conversations that they're grabbing onto. West Sacramento, a little different approach. Their coalition, several people on it have had exposure to asset-based approaches, and the communities they're focusing on have done some of that work. So there's a little bit of track record there. So they want to jump right into doing this with the community. So in 2 weeks, we're going to do an asset mapping exercise with about a dozen folks from their coalition and at least a dozen to 2 dozen community connectors, which are residents whose leadership is exercised often by connecting people or moving in several circles. So they've organized a meeting, and they've identified the people. They've identified about 30 people that they want to invite. So the method we're using is each member of their coalition who knows 2 or 3 of these people will call them, invite them based on who they are and what they have to offer. So it's not just an email saying we need some people at a meeting. And then hopefully out of that 30, they'll get a dozen or more folks to be able to come that night. They're providing childcare, they're providing food, they're providing some incentive
Nice.
gift cards. And so, which is nice because that's always good when you have residents and professionals in a room. Professionals theoretically are getting paid to be there. So if the residents are getting a gift card, that sort of balances that out too.
Nice.
And we'll do a similar process what we did in Napa, just different folks in the room, and see what kind of assets they identify in their community in those 6 categories. But then we'll ask, how could we use our assets to improve heart health in West Sacramento, which is their primary area of focus. So instead of saying what are the issues, the needs, the problems, fried food, lack of education, blah, 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 too many fast food joints, we'll start with the assets and then say, how can we use these to improve heart health? And we'll see what they come up with.
So what if the community says we don't care about heart health?
Right? So, yeah, ideally you do this process before you develop your focus.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, yeah.
So the third step, so the first step is what are our assets. The second is how do our assets speak to what we're working on. And the third step is to say what do we want to do together, which sometimes identifies the most important thing, often does not. A lot of communities I work with, their major health issue is violence, and while any objective measure or research in that community might say the biggest challenge in the community or most important priority is to reduce gang activity or gang violence, that's not usually what people take on first. They might take on a safe crossing about a busy road for kids, or making more activities in the park. They'll pick up different things. And what we professionals have to learn in that process is, regardless of all our papers and studies that say that this community is challenged by violence, we got to go with what they want to go with. Trusting that with that, they will build up skills and confidence, and that they will eventually get to the violence issue, but with a lot more to work with to take it on than right after an asset mapping. So that all is to say it's entirely possible that communities say, yeah, we don't want to work on any of that. Given that we're open to saying what might people want to do, and that we don't plan any action steps that don't have community resident leaders saying, I want to lead that, I think we'll find some place where there's an intersection between what community leaders want to do and what the members of the catchy want to do. It might be direct or it might be indirect. Kind of like Napa is finding lots of people who want to work on getting local governments to, I mentioned earlier, local governments to fly rainbow flags during Pride Month. And so they're going to work with them on that, which it does definitely have a connection to social isolation, but it certainly wasn't part of their existing strategies or anything. But what will happen is they'll develop a lot of relationships around that, and connect a lot of assets around that, because that's where some people have some energy. And once that's been done, they can say, what else can we do to reduce social isolation? And now they have a set of relationships to work with, and that's where the power comes from in this work.
So did that idea for the flags come out of the asset process, or
no, it came out of learning conversations that came out of the asset process.
Okay, where people.
Yeah, there's certainly folks active in the LGBTQ community in Napa who are identified in the asset mapping process, and there was a center that was identified, but there was no discussion of flying flags.
I just want to note too something I think you're saying, Ron, that is important. It's like, starting with what the collective wants to do, and it's like building their ABCD muscles so that
Exactly.
enough to go do some of the other work that needs to be done. So it's like, start somewhere.
Right.
Well,
and there's two pieces there. One is you are recognizing that part of what we're doing is building power of residents. The muscles is a power thing, meaning their ability to act. And you're trusting that if they want to go a certain direction, and we feel like we've identified an important issue, that those will meet. Otherwise, maybe you didn't identify that important of an issue.
And it's practice ground too, to start somewhere. Yeah.
And it also kind of speaks to what I think so it's like doing that, but then as the professionals are like, oh, but I gotta do this thing, right? Just the ability to be patient, right, for the process and kind of figuring out a different role. Like it makes me, like when I was the director of a health department, the county that Mount St. Helens blew, we did this asset work, right? We went into the community. Clearly I wasn't doing it right because I was much younger, but we were like, you need a bath, we said, you need a stoplight. That's what it was. And they were like, we just want our bathroom back in the park that got demolished from the volcano.
Right.
And so, it's just like this, for some reason, I don't know, somebody thought they needed a stoplight. And
you can have that argument all day and it won't.
That's
the way people aren't coming to your meeting, or you can help people get the bathroom. And once the bathroom's in place, they might turn around and say, you know what, we also need a stoplight over there.
Yeah, that's right. So it just, anyway, yeah. So that's really helpful, what you're saying. I don't know, reflections, Diego, Kim, Julie? She's muted.
You're muted, Kim.
Sorry. It brings to mind a story that I heard that I've never forgotten. Same sort of scenario. The coalition wanted to fix the roads, and so they petitioned to get these roads repaved in this one neighborhood because they were just third world, potholy, dirt, the whole thing. And without reaching out to the community, they thought, oh, this will make their house values go up. This will be better for them. And once it was all said and done, they went out and they were like kind of looking for like attaboys, like, how is that? They're like, what have you done? Now our kids can't play at the playgrounds without us being there. It was traffic control, it was speed control, so we had just, these people had just totally made everyone in the neighborhood mad, rather than, them thinking, oh, thank heaven, someone finally paved our roads. And so it is something that you really do need to, I've been writing this down because we're looking for community champions, and it's like, be careful what you ask for, be ready for the answer, because here comes the information and it's like nowhere on our radar. Right. But so I'm writing all this down. This is extremely good for me to hear. So.
Well, yeah, and Kim, just because we've been in these conversations about June 21st, and I brought up, okay, so the hospital cares about cancer screening. But maybe the community doesn't care about cancer screening, right? And
well, they don't. I mean, if in all the forms that they filled out and all the, CHNA stuff, it didn't hit the radar at all. And so it's okay for us to have drivers while we have the momentum of the two hospitals at the table, but we need to hear what flags need to fly, at the gay parade. So, I mean, I think that's a
once you find out what people are interested and care about, want to do, it might be quite possible to integrate cancer screening into that.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's a difference of which comes first.
Right.
And what we found is by listening, not just listening to the community, but engaging the community and following the community's lead, is that then we have more to work with. It's definitely, HCD work is definitely governed by that axiom of that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. This is definitely a long road approach, not a fast one.
This may be a dumb question, but how do you get those champions, those community members, like your grandma's group? How do you get them to step forward or to champion? I mean, they're championing their own neighborhoods, but I mean, how do we get them to the surface to where we can identify them?
Well, you identify them through your asset mapping, so you can only identify what the people in the room know of. That's why the more people are in the room for asset mapping and the more diverse backgrounds they come from, the better. And then once a group's identified, then just going, this is where the associational interview comes into play. So going and sitting with them and hearing what they're about and what they care about, and sharing what you're doing and seeing if there's common cause there. So it's, instead of recruiting people, or what I call the sales job of saying, here, this really matters, heart health really matters, come to this meeting. We go to folks and say, what do you care about? What matters to you? Here's what we're working on. Would you have any interest in connecting with us about this? And they might say, yeah, we really, are worried about our husbands and our sons, and, they work in the fields, and hypertension is a huge issue. And so, yeah, we'd like to figure something out about that, which is much more likely to happen than saying we invite you to come to our meeting.
We're doing these community outreaches right now. Today's the last one, the number 5 of 5. And it's been really, really super informative, but not super, super well attended. And so I really think we need to do another round of these and get somebody, the attendees, to blast it out on their email distribution list, not just mine, because they're the ones that are really tied to the community. But so I think we're doing the right things. I just think it's going to take a little time. I don't think the community's used to us doing these kinds of things so vigilantly, and so they might even be afraid of us. Who knows? I don't even know.
You are pretty scary. Yeah.
We are scary.
Yeah.
Well, I think I need to go. I've got people at my door. The lights have been blinking, and so no. I think that I need to go. I apologize. This was unexpected, but great. I really thank you, Ron, for being on the call today and allowing me to monopolize some of the time.
Oh,
good to see you, Kim.
Yeah, nice to see you.
Good to see you guys. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Diego and Julie, any thoughts you guys want to make sure we cover in our last few minutes?
If folks don't have, one question I would have is just around, asset mapping. Like, if you were to bring a group together to do an asset map, what might be some activities or framing or questions that you would give them?
So the most effective way that I've done it and seen it done is bringing folks together, with inviting through personal invitations. Emails are helpful for reminders and location and stuff like that, but really inviting people personally, get them in the room. And then a quick introduction to the 6 asset areas, what they are, so people kind of have common definitions. And then put up 6 sheets around the room, usually 2 or 3 actually flip charts per asset area, and divide the room into 6 groups, and which I usually just count off 1 to 6. And then, so have one group go to individuals, one go to associations, one go to institutions, one go to culture and stories, one go to places and spaces, just like that. And then have them write down on the flip charts the assets in their community under that category. So the folks at institutions would write down, Jefferson Elementary School, Natomas Middle School, the local clinic, whatever its name is, and you give them about 3 minutes, and folks will come up with quite a bit. And then you say rotate, and everybody moves one asset over. So the people who are working on associations now go work on institutions. The people who are working on institutions now go work on places and spaces. And they add to the list. They see what other people wrote and they add to the list. And so you do that 6 times. That takes about 25, 30 minutes tops. And you end up having a pretty good, rich list of assets. Once you've done the 6 times, now the group who is at places and spaces or physical assets is back there, and they kind of read off the whole thing to the group so that everyone sees what all the assets are.
I'm putting this up here because I'm, since Julie, I know, didn't attend. I don't know if this would be the right thing to show, Ron, but can you see that?
Let me see. Hang on. I've got two screens going.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Sue.
Oh, yeah.
That.
So those are samples of the types of things people come up with. But when we do it ourselves, we don't use generic things like colleges. We would say, you know, here I would say Sacramento City College.
Yeah, and is the next one blank, right? So here's
right.
And really, if you don't have this stuff, or Diego, like I can just send it along, but that this could be used, right? So
yeah, I would love that, because I think there's a few categories that I haven't been using in my maps, and that's really kind of an eye opener of like, oh yeah, right, places and spaces. Why didn't I think of that?
mm-hmm.
And sometimes, you know, something's not currently an asset. Sometimes a vacant lot is not, but we put it down because it could be an asset. It's space that could be community garden or play space or any number of things, even if right now it's just used for throwing old mattresses.
Mm-hmm.
And then we look and say, okay, where are these assets well connected, or where would we like them to be better connected? I mean, the first thing I always ask at the end of that is, what do you think? And generally that's just a moment for folks to reflect. And they usually respond with something like, you know, I'm overwhelmed with how much we have to work with. Residents in a community will often say something like, I've never been so proud of my community, or I've never felt so good at it, because a lot of times they're focused on, especially if they've been labeled high needs communities, you know, their focus and the media's focus is usually on what's wrong. So it helps just to give a moment to take stock and say, yeah, we're good, we're solid, we've got a lot to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And then to ask folks, you know, where are the particular ones that are the ones that are particularly exciting to you, or are there connections you could see that you see here that you don't think exist out there? Are there certain assets that could be better connected that would help us have the community we want to have, or help us reduce social isolation? So that from a health perspective, and when you have a particular agenda, as catchies do, you know, putting that out there and saying, okay, how could these help us better do X?
Mm-hmm.
And then I usually finish with asking folks, given these assets and given the discussion we've had around how they might be useful to the goals of the people in this room, is there any particular action or set of connections that people want to work on?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, sometimes the people who have a lot of energy and excited will say, oh, I really want to, I use an example of communities. And one group said, I really want to work more on opportunities for young people. And another person said, I want to work on promoting our neighborhood because we have so much to offer. We need to, you know, get that written up, get a social media presence out there, just kind of counter what the media and nonprofits keep saying about us.
Mm-hmm.
And then another group wanted to work on cleanup, that there was a lot of vacant lots in this particular neighborhood. And that's what, so then I just asked folks, okay, well, if you want to work on any of those, go to that group where that person is, and we'll give you 15 minutes to talk about how you might use these assets
Mm-hmm.
to do those things. And they kind of work on it and then present back. This is if you have like 2 to 3 hours, and then present back what they came up with. And some folks will say, oh my gosh, that's what I really want to work on because I like how you're doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So I had you know, in this situation, or in a different one like that, I had a group that really wanted to work on public art and a group that wanted to do community gardening. In that meeting, they talked about the assets they had, and one of the assets they both had was a lot of vacant lots that had walls nearby, because for the community gardening people, that helped with like sheds and stuff. But for the artists, right, it was potential equal space. And so they combined groups and then ended up working together to use their institutional supporters to get access to these spaces to both garden and mural. and they did it together, and the artists learned how to garden, and the garden interested people learned how to mural. And so that's the general process that works well, the questions that get folks moving. You know, it's sort of a, here's what assets are, here's what we have, here's what we're excited about, and then what do we want to do with it?
Yeah, now go
And
do
that last one can go any number of directions.
Yeah. So I think, what time are we ending at? Is it at 3?
3:15.
3:50.
Because I was like, oh, I don't want it to be over. There's a piece here from Julie, you know, do you ever use the graphic note-taking form to display assets? Like we did with the Harvest at Art of Hosting would be a great infographic to communicate community assets as identified by the community.
Yeah, if you have access to those skills and resources, writing it up afterwards that way to send back out, usually in a kind of 2-hour meeting, which is a lot of times what you have in a community. In 2 hours, you have people arrive, you explain the assets, you have them identify them, you have them do some work on what they might want to do with them and present back and set up future meetings, and that's about all you can do. But when people have the ability to write it up in some sort of graphic form later and send it back out, it becomes a really great marketing tool for engaging people in it. Because it's just, you know, all the reasons graphic reporting is helpful. It helps people access it, understand it.
Yeah, here's what, you know, we did, this is also Napa. I mean, it's not exactly assets, but there was this food study, right? Just trying to understand why people are not accessing the emergency food system. So Julie, this was a way to take information that was gleaned from these are adults. There was 3 different ones, but this one was adults experiencing homelessness and just capturing like, this is what we heard. And then also capturing their ideas for solutions. So it's a similar kind of like idea, right, of using graphic recording, but it's like the whole point of Harvest, right, is this what you said? And glean, you know, that information. So yeah. Yeah,
no, if you have the resources to do that, it's great because it just, you know, people can engage with it better.
Yeah. Yeah, so great question. I think the other thing that came up, I don't know if we want to use time, is around governance, right? And or if there are other things that people want to talk about, other questions around the process. So I'll just kind of, Julie and Diego, any other reflections? Does, you know, in terms of anything else that Ron could offer?
This is Diego. I think in terms of, I like the idea of using the asset map and as a way to identify the assets. And I know you were talking about, Ron, about discussing how do we connect these assets, or how do we, what do we do once we identify these? And I wanted to ask you if there's, like, what process do you use? Is it more of a discussion-based, like we'll bring up questions and have it be a little bit more broad and open-ended, or is there tools that you use to kind of prompt that kind of discussion? Just because I'm thinking of how we've used in the past in our community, we talk about environmental scans. And so then it becomes a list of just these assets. And so when we talk about when we identify too many assets, I feel like at least in my perspective, our community gets overwhelmed and just says, well, we need to bring them all to the table. And that's not necessarily the best use of the work group or the coalition's time to make sure that every single person or every single asset is identified or has a voice at the table.
Yeah, so there's a few different ways. I used to actually have people either draw lines or use string to show where assets are well connected and where they could be better connected. But it just gets really messy because there's so many connections. And I'm not sure we got a lot out of that. So I generally go to sort of a circle discussion mode, kind of surrounded by the assets, and it a little bit depends on what people say when we ask, what do you think? But I generally, first thing try to do is try to steer it towards relationship building. So that the question will be something like, which of these assets do we really need to connect with? Which of these assets do we really need to connect each other with, or connect to each other? Because an asset map really should just be a guide for engagement. But you're engaging folks around the strengths. And from that, it can go all kinds of directions. If I have doers in the room, I'll do like what I talked about before. I might say those things, but then say, given the assets that we see, what do we think is possible for our community? That tends to be a really powerful question for folks, and lots of implementation ideas will emerge. So that's sort of how you start to funnel it from like, oh my gosh, there's all these assets, which is great because that gives people a sense of power, to, and here's what we're going to work on. In the what is possible question, if you know you've got some interest in the room, like in your case, Diego, asthma reduction, you can say what would be possible for healthy breathing amongst children or amongst seniors or whoever, you know, if you want to do subpopulations, given these assets we have. And people will get creative at that point and think of stuff you thought of and think of stuff you haven't thought of, but it's their what they thought of in either case. And so that gives them a lot of energy to carry stuff through. And then, you know, after some people share some possibilities, you'll see there's, you know, be more or less energy around different ones. And then you can say, okay, it sounds like there's a lot of energy around this particular possibility. Who would like to work on how we would make that happen, so that you don't leave the room without some sort of concrete ideas of what people are going to do, who they're going to go talk to, and when they're going to come back and, you know, as a subgroup convene and say, you know, here's what we learned. So in that case of, I had the people in the community who wanted to work on cleanup, you know, they left the room with, they each had a list of different assets that they were going to go interview, either individuals or institutions they're going to try to meet with, or associations they're going to try to meet with and listen to. And then they had a meeting date in about 6 weeks that they're going to come back and bring everything they learned from their learning conversations to say what that meant for any cleanup effort. Which is a lot different than saying, I want to organize a cleanup on July 20th and everybody come over here, which is just a logistical conversation.
I love
that's partly, that's,
yeah, I mean that, yeah.
You don't narrow the assets, you narrow it by saying, what are we going to do with them?
Well, and kind of there's an action step, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I think there's always this tension I hear a lot with the groups of process, but people want to act. You know, it's kind of interesting. So,
yeah, and if the first action is we're going to go listen to people, that's a really good first action. Because otherwise it's still just a list on paper in a room that's been experienced by a couple dozen people, which is great, but that should just be a first step.
Yeah. Great. That's very, very helpful. And, you know, Julie and Diego, I'm promoting you, Ron. Like, you know, he's available as a resource. So, if interested. So.
Sorry, say that again, Sue.
I said, he, as well as others, right, that are part of, you know, I have some contracts with folks are available as a resource if this is something you might want to explore further in your community. He, is a resource for you to support you to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's something I think we are, at least here in Imperial County, are trying to be more proactive about the resources that are available through Catchy. So knowing that you are available to us, I'll talk to our team and see how we can best use your services and what kind of tools or expertise you can provide to help us in that effort.
Great.
But thank you for that response, Ron. I apologize I didn't respond a little bit earlier. Just wanted to make sure. I'm not in the only office, so I wanted to be respectful of conversations that were happening before asking them to respectfully let me speak. But yeah, I agree with your response. I think that's what we try to do here in Imperial County in terms of like trying to provide probing questions that allows for the action. But I agree with Sue. The issue is having that kind of ownership to take action. A lot, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of people wear too many hats in a small community, and they feel overwhelmed to say, if they bring up an idea, they feel like they have to be responsible for making it happen. And so so that's something that we struggle with.
Actually works really well in small communities. I mean, I did this in rural areas of California for quite a while because of the multi-hat nature of everyone in the room. A lot of times it moves quicker because everyone knows who everyone is, and these things can happen pretty quickly. So it can work pretty well in that context. And a lot of it depends who's in the room. If I have a bunch of residents in the room and a few agency people and they want to move to action, we will move to action. I'll just sort of keep them focused on action around assets versus, and doing another needs assessment or something. The problem is if it's a lot of agency people in the room and they want to move to action, the more they do stuff, the more they are displacing residents' opportunity to exercise their power. And so this is where the equity question comes in. So if I have a lot of agency people in the room, I'm going to try to hold them back from many actions except for doing more listening with the assets, because if they jump in and start doing stuff, then there's no room for all these assets to come in. It's a displacement issue. And so a part of it depends on the context you're in and who's in the room about whether it's a good idea to move quickly to action or not. But yeah, if you have a lot of practitioners, agency people saying, we want to jump into action, so it can be helpful to remind them that while well-intended, when those of us who are paid to do this action move ahead, we just generally repeat the status quo that existed but prior to that meeting, which is residents being trained that agency people will do the work and they just need to be clients and wait. So it can be very disempowering for well-meaning agency people to take all the action.
I completely hear what you're saying. I feel like at least in my experience with work groups that I've been a part of or helped be a backbone to, they continue talking about the community and residents, but they're so ingrained in getting to the action part that sometimes the residents aren't invited to the meeting or aren't even aware that there's these things going on. Right. So bridging that gap of communication and giving the power to the residents that are interested and want to be action driven and want to be part of the solution to open up that space. So, yeah. But yeah, I completely understand what you're saying.
Wow. Okay. Now it's 3:15. Wow. That time went by so quickly. It seems like. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks everybody for jumping in on this. I think Diego just said.
Thank you, Ron, for your wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so Julie and Diego, if you have any questions, I actually, Diego, sent to Christina a while back, an email about all of this because she was asking some questions. So you could also follow up with her too on that.
Yes, I was planning on following up, especially with the idea of Ron being available for TA. So I'll check in with Christina to see how best we can use that resource if it's appropriate.
Great. Very good.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Dana and Sue, for putting this together.
Okay.
Have a good day, everybody.
Okay.
Have a good
Bye.
day. Bye-bye.
Bye.